Chapter 41 Arthur's Betrayal. Yet Elund could not do enough about the arrival of Agravain de Boys. He was exactly what Arthur needed, and brought a strange calmness to the stone halls of the city. Too strange, for he had fallen for Morgana's wit, hoping to control Arthur's ward as well as keep the prince under his command as well as Arthur in his bed. A slow-acting venom, designed to isolate the prince from the very people who he trusted. 88,888,888 Aeled was heading to Morgana's chambers when Agravain stood in the archway, his noble robes fanning out around him like a shield. "You have a long memory, Aeled," Agravain said, his voice a smooth, dangerous silk. "I saw it in your eyes the moment I arrived. You remember the uprising at Tintagel. You remember the night King Mark's peace was shattered." Aeled didn't look up, but her grip on the hilt tightened. "I remember a rebellion that came out of nowhere. I remember a wedding that failed because the groom never arrived. I remember the chaos that followed." For this is how it had been. Elund had been going over it in her mind, time and time again. Yes, she had sworn to Arthur, to Camelot now. But then, she was a Saxon guard, of course she behaved in line with the king she served. "And you suspect who fanned those flames?" Agravain whispered, stepping into her space. "You think you saw me in those shadows? You think you know why Tristan stayed away?" He leaned down, his eyes shimmering at her with unearned victory. "But your suspicions are a Saxon's word against a lord's." "To Arthur, I am family." "To Arthur, you are a mercenary with a history of shifting loyalties." "If you speak a word of your theories, I will ensure he sees your silence as complicity. I will tell him you were the one who signaled the rebels." "Who do you think he will believe?" And Elund knew it was true. Arthur hung these days on Agravain's every word. She watched him stalk away in triumph. 88,888,888 The toll began to show in the council meetings as Agravain worked with the touch of an expert to subtly undermine Arthur's confidence in anyone who was not a noble Briton. "A king must be wary of those who have spent too long in the shadows, Arthur," Agravain said during a quiet strategy session. He cast a disparaging look toward Aeled, who stood silently by the door. "Sentiment for a guard can cloud a leader's judgment. It makes one blind to the rot that can hide behind a loyal face." Arthur looked at Elund, searching for her voice, as she promised she would give. But Aeled remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor, the weight of Agravain's blackmail pressing down on her chest as if he was there inflicting the pain in her chest physically. Arthur's brow furrowed, a flash of hurt crossing his features. "Aeled, you have nothing to say to my uncle's counsel." "The Lord Agravain is of your blood, Arthur," she said, her voice a hollow rasp. "His words carry the weight of your heritage. It is not for me to contradict him." The rejection in her voice was a physical wound. Arthur turned away, his jaw set in a hard line. The bridge of trust that had carried them through the Wyvern injury, the loss of Lancelot, a broken bar, everything a broken bar began to crumble. "I understand, Elund. I really think I do." 88,888,888 Arthur cornered her later that evening in the physician's chambers. The room was dim, smelling of dried herbs and the leech tank. Elund heeded something to help her sleep, but more than that, the reassurance of Gaius's calming words. "What has happened to you?" Arthur demanded, his voice low and trembling with a mix of frustration and mounting concern. "Ever since my uncle arrived, you've faded away. A broken bar. Are you gone, then, the person I ached to speak to, for her honesty? Are you a wraith, like that thing we burned?" Elund turned, itching for the fight, that old, familiar sparring match. "You won't look at me a broken bar. You won't speak to me anymore. Are you truly so intimidated by a title?" "It isn't about titles, Arthur," Aeled said, her heart breaking as she saw the confusion in his eyes. "Then what? Is it Tintagel?" Arthur stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if to catch her before she vanished. "He says you were different there. He says you were troubled." "If something happened, Aeled, a broken bar. If someone harmed were broken bar. Stop," she cried, pushing his hand away. "Just stop. Your uncle is the nobility you've always wanted at your side. While your father is ill, a broken bar, he is the connection to your mother." She broke off, and stalked towards the door. her head pounding. Arthur stood frozen, watching her go. As she got to the stairs, Elune turned her head, and he saw the flicker of sheer terror in her eyes, the same look she'd had when the veil was torn. What was it she was protecting him from? Elune. He called down the stairs, but to no avail. Elune had continued down the stairs and across the courtyard without a backwards glance. 88,888,888 as Arthur walked away, his steps heavy with a new, cold doubt. Aeled slumped against the stone wall of the armory room where she slept, and closed her eyes. Not knowing she had been seen, she closed her eyes, and began to hear words in her head, not knowing that Mordred had been watching her from the gallery. "He wants the lie because it's comfortable," Mordred's voice echoed in her mind, soft and cold. "Agravain gives him a family. You only give him the truth of the reality of war, of mud and the sweat and the blood. Eventually, he will choose the uncle, Elune. And when he does, you will have to run, you will have to come to the woods." Aeled closed her eyes, the scent of the salt air from Tintagel seeming to fill the room. As she slipped into a fitful sleep, as she slowly realized that Agravain's greatest treason wasn't what he had done to innocent the coast, it was what he was doing to Arthur's heart right now. 888,888,888. The air in Camelot had turned predatory. It was in the dim, torchlit passage of the West Tower that Arthur saw them, Agravain, leaning in close, his hand gripping Aeled's arm with a bruising intensity, and Aeled, standing unnaturally still, her face pale and her eyes wide with a trapped, suffocating fear. He saw his uncle's predatory stance and Aeled's trembling silence, and his heart burned with a protective rage as he assumed the worst, that Agravain was using his position to demand she visit his chambers under duress. Assuming he knew why Elune had changed from the determined young woman he had known to one who slunk in the shadows, a call, from Hector, startled him into action. The Saxons were attacking again, this time at the northern periphery, where the defenses were weakest. He turned, his fury channeled to defense of his city, calling to his knights to be with him and be ready. 88,888,888. The next morning, Arthur stormed into the council chamber, his face a mask of royal fury. Aeled stood by the window, her back to the room, while Agravain sat calmly at the long table. Merlin stood in the shadows by the water pitcher, his eyes darting between them, sensing the shift in the air. "Leave us," Arthur commanded the guards and the assembled knights to go, his voice vibrating dangerously. As the doors clanged shut, Arthur turned on his uncle. "I saw you last night, Agravain. If you think your relationship to me gives you the right to demand Aeled visit your chambers, then you have forgotten what it means to be a nobleman." Aeled turned sharply, her breath catching. "Arthur, no!" Elune. Arthur snapped, his protective instinct flaring into a blind rage. "I will not have you shamed in my father's castle. It will stop, Agravain, or you will leave this place and never return." Agravain did not flinch. He rose slowly, a look of profound, sorrowful disappointment washing over his features. "Arthur," Agravain said softly, "you misunderstand. I was not demanding her presence in my bed. I was pleading with her to stop." Arthur froze. "Stop what?" "To stop the ruin she is bringing upon you," Agravain said, stepping around the table. He cast a look of mock pity toward Elune. "I cornered her because I found proof. Proof of why Senead's Saxons knew our border patrols were thinned. Proof of how Morgause found the secret way into the citadel." He turned back to Arthur, his eyes brimming with a staged sincerity. "She is a Saxon, Arthur. She didn't just witness the uprising at Tintagel, she orchestrated the signals. And the dragon." He lowered his voice. "Why do you think it spared the castle that night?" "Because she spoke to it. She is in league with the Great East itself." 88,888,888. Arthur felt his world break. He looked at Aeled, searching for the gritty denial that usually defined her. But Aeled was paralyzed. If she fought Agravain now, he would reveal the Tintagel truther that she had once failed a kingdom for Golda, and Arthur would hate her anyway. "Aeled?" Arthur's voice was a broken whisper. "Tell me he's lying. Tell me you aren't Aeled looked at Agravain, who smirked at her for a fraction of a second, then looked at Arthur, the man she had loved through every war, and she saw the light behind his eyes dying. "You know I am Saxon, and what I was before I saved you from the wyvern," she began. "The truth, Elund." Arthur mounded beside her. Merlin stepped forward, his face pale. He knew the truth. He himself was the last Dragon Lord. He was the one who had commanded the beast to leave Camelot. But he could not, of course. He gave Elund a pleading look. "Is it true?" Arthur roared, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword. "Did you bring more gauze here? Did you speak to the beast that burned my people?" Aeled didn't answer. She couldn't. And he knew how attentive Kilgore had been when they had rescued Gwen. What hope did she have with the truth when Tintagel was not about Camelot? Arthur recoiled at her silence as violently as if she had struck him. The protective rage he had felt for her honor dissolved into an absolute hatred of the betrayal he felt she had possessed since she had arrived. "Never trust a Saxon," Arthur had told him. "Apologies, Uncle," he said to Agravain. "You have been trying to save me from my own blindness all this time." Arthur turned away from Elund. "Get out," he told her. "If you are within the walls of Camelot by sunset, I will execute you myself." Aeled went, her jaw set. Then she must go. To where? She did not know. One of those places on the old map she had seen. What would Persia be like at this time of year? By the time Merlin caught her in the armory passageway corridor, she had a plan. It was a good plan, one she may have spent the last few years fulfilling if she had not been caught by the wyvern's sharp talons and had had the strength to protest against the knights taking her back to Camelot for treatment. His hand grabbed her sleeve to stop her from rushing past him. Aeled, wait. Why didn't you let me speak? I could have told him. A broken bar told him what? Merlin, that you're a sorcerer? Aeled wiped a stray tear from her cheek, her eyes turning back to flint. Agravain has won this round, but I am not leaving him to finish the job. He'll kill you if he finds you, Merlin hissed. Let him try, she said, checking the edge of her hidden blade. Arthur may have cast me out, but I am still his knight. He tried once before. He can hate me from the throne, he can banish me to the mud, but I will not stop breathing until Agravain de Bois is dead and the king is safe. Merlin looked at her, seeing her devotion to Camelot, to Arthur, understanding her words. What are you going to do? I'm going into the shadows, Merlin. Exactly where Agravain thinks he's sent me. She adjusted her cloak, the heavy Cymric blade slung across her back. Keep Arthur safe from the inside. I'll do all I can from outside the city walls. The balance of power had turned. Elund pictured where Agravain sat, beside Arthur, at the council chamber table, making plans. Agravain had been a predator, and now he was totally unaware that his prey had just become his hunter. Arthur had chosen his law, but Aeled had chosen her lord. And she would save him, even if he never knew her name again. 88,888,888. It was then the shout came up, over the walls of the inner castle. The word went round, to the guards, and then the lords and ladies, the servants and the tradespeople. The gates closed, the portcullises clanked downwards. The king was dead. Long live the king.